Chapter 14 Mr. Darcy. During Elizabeth's daily walk within the park of rosings which the people at the parsonage were permitted to visit, she more than once unexpectedly met Mr. Darcy. To prevent it ever happening again, she took care on the first occasion to inform him that it was her favorite part. It was very strange, therefore, that it happened a second time, but it did, and even a third. He actually thought it necessary to turn back and walk with her. He never said a great deal, and she did not give herself the trouble of talking or listening much. One day she was reading Jane's last letter again as she walked, when, instead of being again surprised by Mr. Darcy, she looked up and saw that Colonel Fitzwilliam was coming to meet her. They walked together towards the parsonage. "Is it settled that you leave Kent on Saturday?" she asked. "Yes, if Darcy does not put it off again. But he arranges our business just as he pleases. I share with him the responsibility of looking after Miss Darcy." "Do you really? And does she give you much trouble? Young ladies of her age are sometimes difficult to manage." As she spoke, she saw him looking at her very seriously, and his manner made her believe that she had somehow or other got fairly near the truth. She replied immediately, "You need not be frightened. I have never heard any harm of her. She is a great favourite of some ladies of my acquaintance, Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley. I think that you know them." "I know them a little. The brother is a great friend of Darcy's." "Oh yes," said Elizabeth sharply. "Mrs. Darcy is uncommonly kind to Mr. Bingley and takes great care of him." "Care of him?" "Yes, I really believe Darcy does take care of him. From something that he told me, I have reason to think that Bingley must have cause to be very grateful to him." "What do you mean?" "It is a matter which Darcy, of course, could not wish to be generally known, because if it were to reach the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing." "You may depend on my not mentioning it." "What he told me was this, that he congratulated himself on having saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most unwise marriage, but without mentioning names or any other details." "Did Mr. Darcy give you his reasons for his involvement?" "I understood that there were some very strong objections to the lady." Elizabeth walked on, her heart swelling with anger. She could not trust herself further with the subject, and therefore, quickly changing the conversation, talked about different matters until they reached the parsonage. There, shut in her own room as soon as their visitor had left them, she could think without interruption of all that she had heard. She had never doubted that Mr. Darcy had been involved in the action taken to separate Mr. Bingley and Jane, but she had always blamed Miss Bingley as the chief person responsible. But now she knew. He was the cause, his pride was the cause of all that Jane had suffered. He had ruined every hope of happiness for the most loving, most generous heart in the world. There were some very strong objections to the lady, were Colonel Fitzwilliam's words, and these strong objections probably included her having one uncle who was a country lawyer and another who was in business in London. "To Jane herself," she whispered, "there could be no possible objection. She is all beauty and goodness. Her understanding is excellent, her mind improved, and her manners excellent. Neither could my father be to blame, since he has abilities that Mr. Darcy himself could not fail to respect." But when she thought of her mother, her confidence did weaken a little. The excitement and tears which the subject caused brought on a headache, and it became so much worse towards the evening that, added to her unwillingness to see Mr. Darcy, it made her decide not to go with her cousins to Rosings, where they were invited to take tea. Mrs. Collins, seeing that she was really unwell, did not urge her to go, and prevented her husband as much as possible from urging her. But Mr. Collins could not hide his fear that Lady Catherine might be rather displeased by her staying at home. When they had gone, Elizabeth, as if intending to sharpen her anger as much as possible against Mr. Darcy, chose for her employment the examination of all the letters which Jane had written to her since her arrival in Kent. They continued no actual complaint, but in all, and in almost every line of which, there was a lack of the cheerfulness that had always been natural to her. Mr. Darcy's shameful pride in what he had been able to cause gave Elizabeth a keener sense of her sister's sufferings. At this point, she was suddenly interrupted by the sound of the doorbell, and, to her complete astonishment, she saw Mr. Darcy walk into the room. In a hurried manner, he immediately began an inquiry after her health. She answered him with cold politeness. He sat down for a few moments, and then getting up, walked around the room. Elizabeth was surprised, but did not say a word. After a silence of several minutes, he came towards her in a troubled manner and began to speak. "I have struggled without success. My feelings will not be controlled. You must allow me to tell you how warmly I admire and love you." Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She looked away, red in the face, and was silent. He considered this enough encouragement, and the expression of all that he felt for her immediately followed. He spoke well, but there were other feelings to be described besides those of his heart, and his words were more concerned with pride than love. His sense of her inferiority, his feeling that he was lowering himself, the family considerations that had caused his judgment to oppose his preference, all were expressed with a force that was unlikely to make his proposal acceptable. In spite of her deeply rooted dislike, she could not fail to realize what an honor it was to receive such a man's attention, and though her intentions did not change for one moment, she was at first sorry for the pain that he would receive until, insulted by his language as he continued, she lost all pity in anger. She tried to control herself so she could answer him patiently when he had finished. He ended by expressing the hope that he would now be rewarded by her acceptance of his land in marriage. As he said this, she could clearly see that he had no doubt of a favorable answer. Such confidence could only increase her annoyance, and when he had ended, the color in her face deepened, and she said, "If I could feel grateful, as I believe one should in such a situation, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly given it most unwillingly. The reasons which, you tell me, have long prevented the expression of your feelings can have little difficulty in bringing them under control." Mr. Darcy, whose eyes were fixed on her face, seemed to hear her words with no less anger than surprise. He became pale, and the confusion in his mind was plain in every feature. Finally, in a voice of forced calmness, he said, "And this is all the reply which I am to have the honor of expecting. I might perhaps wish to be informed why, with so little attempt at politeness, I am refused. I might as well inquire, she replied, why with so clear an intention of insulting me, you chose to tell me that you liked me against your will. Was that not some excuse for impoliteness, if I was impolite? But I have other reasons. Do you think that any consideration would lead me to accept the man who has been the means of ruining, perhaps forever, the happiness of my most dearly loved sister? As she spoke these words, Mr. Darcy's face changed color, but he listened without interrupting her while she continued. Nothing can excuse the unjust and ungenerous part that you played there. You cannot state that you have not been the chief, if not the only means of dividing the pair of them. She paused and saw that he was listening in a manner that proved him to be unmoved. Is it not true that you have done it? She repeated. He then replied with calmness, Yes, it is true that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, and that I am glad of my success. I have been kinder towards him than towards myself. Elizabeth appeared not to notice this polite remark, but its meaning did not escape her, nor was it likely to soften her feelings. But it is not only this affair, she continued, on which my dislike is based. Long before, your character was made plain in the story which I received many months ago from Mr. Wickham. You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concerns, said Darcy in a more troubled voice and with deeper color in his face. No one who knows his misfortunes can help feeling an interest in him. His misfortunes, repeated Darcy scornfully. Yes, his misfortunes have been great. And you are responsible, cried Elizabeth with energy. You have reduced him to his present state. And this, cried Darcy, as he walked with quick steps across the room, is your opinion of me. I thank you for explaining it so fully, but perhaps, he added, stopping in his walk and turning towards her, these offenses might have been forgiven if your pride had not been hurt by my honest explanation of the reasons that made me wait so long. I am not ashamed of the feelings that I expressed. They were natural and fair. Could you expect me to be happy about the inferiority of your relations? Elizabeth felt herself becoming more angry every moment, but she tried to speak calmly as she said, You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have led me to accept it. Again, his astonishment was clear. She went on, From the very beginning, your manner struck me as showing the greatest pride in yourself and scorn for the feelings of others, and I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be persuaded to marry. You have said quite enough, madam. Forgive me for having wasted so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness. And with these words, he quickly left the room. The disorder of Elizabeth's mind was now painfully great, and from actual weakness she sat down and cried for half an hour. Her astonishment increased every moment that she should receive an offer of marriage from Mr. Darcy. That he should be so much in love with her that he wished to marry her in spite of all the objections that had made him prevent his friends marrying her sister, and which must appear equally strong in his own case, and the shameful pride his shameless admission of what he had done with regard to Jane, his unfeeling manner, his cruelty towards Mr. Wickham. She continued with these unhappy thoughts until the sound of the others returning from Rosings made her hurry away to her own room.